The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a massive dome under the artificial stars. 12 different species sat in their designated sections, each group looking down at the center stage where today's speaker stood. The air hummed, with translation devices working overtime to convert hundreds of different languages into something everyone could understand. Ambassador Zexthal of the Vortani Empire stepped forward on his 6 scaled legs. His yellow eyes gleamed as he looked around the chamber. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a species that had ruled star systems for over 2,000 years. Fellow council members, Zexthal began, his forked tongue flicking out between words. We gather today to discuss the human problem once again. These newcomers continue to make demands that are far beyond their station in our great alliance. Murmurs of agreement rippled through several sections of the chamber. The crystalline Jaren delegates chimed their approval with sounds like breaking glass. The floating jellyfish-like Nefari pulsed with colors that showed their support. The humans, Zexthal continued, have been part of our council for only 30 years. 30 years! My own species had already conquered 12 star systems before these primates even learned to make fire. Yet they dare to ask for equal voting rights and unrestricted expansion into empty sectors of space. In the human section, Ambassador Katie Sullivan sat perfectly still. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple style, and her blue eyes showed no emotion as she listened to the Vortani's speech. Beside her, the other human delegates remained equally calm. This was nothing new. They had heard variations of this speech dozens of times over the past few years. The humans claim they want to help with galactic peace. Zexthal's voice grew louder. But we all know the truth. They are aggressive, unpredictable, and dangerous. They have wars on their own planet even now. How can we trust them with the responsibility that comes with full council membership? On Earth, millions of miles away from the council chambers, Captain Jake Morrison stood in a room filled with holographic displays. The Global Defense Initiative headquarters was buried deep under the Colorado mountains, hidden from any alien sensors that might be watching from orbit. Jake was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had been a soldier for most of his adult life, and now he was helping to plan something that no human had ever attempted before. Status report, Jake said to the woman standing beside him. Dr. Lisa Carter was one of the smartest people on Earth. She had degrees in physics, engineering, and xenobiology. More importantly, she was one of the few humans who truly understood what they were up against. Ship construction is at 97% completion, Lisa reported, reading from a tablet in her hands. The last generation ship, New Dawn, will be ready for launch in 6 days. All civilian populations have been moved to staging areas. The agricultural ships are already loaded with seed banks and genetic samples from Earth. Jake nodded slowly. Around them, hundreds of technicians worked at computer stations, coordinating the largest evacuation in human history. For 3 years, they had been building a fleet of massive ships in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. The work had been done in complete secrecy. Using mining operations as cover, the ships were unlike anything humans had built before. Each generation ship was over 5 miles long and could house 50,000 people. They had their own farms, factories, and even small cities inside their hulls. Most importantly, they were designed to travel between galaxies, not just between stars. What about the cleanup crews? Jake asked. They're making final sweeps of all colonies, Lisa replied. Every piece of technology, every database, every trace of human presence is being removed or destroyed. When we leave, it will be as if we were never there at all. Back in the council chambers, Zexthal was reaching the climax of his speech. I propose that we limit human expansion to their current systems and reduce their voting power to reflect their true status as junior members of this alliance. The vote was quick and predictable. 10 species voted in favor of the restrictions. Only the wise old Catherian delegate abstained, stating that more study was needed. The humans, of course, were not allowed to vote on matters concerning themselves. Ambassador Sullivan stood up slowly when the voting was finished. The chamber fell silent as she walked to the center stage. She was much smaller than most of the alien delegates, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I thank you for this opportunity to address you today. I want to speak about partnership, about trust, and about the future we might have built together." Some of the alien delegates shifted in their seats. They had expected anger or pleading, not this calm, measured tone. "When humanity first made contact with your civilizations 30 years ago, we came with open hearts and minds. We offered our friendship, our knowledge, and our commitment to peace. We asked only to be treated as equals, to have the same opportunities and responsibilities as other council members." Sullivan paused, looking around the chamber. "Today's vote makes it clear that this will never happen. You see us not as partners, but as problems to be managed. You judge us not by our actions, but by your fears of what we might do." Zextel's scales rippled with irritation. "The humans complain, but they offer nothing of value in return for the privileges they seek." Sullivan smiled sadly. "That is where you are wrong, Ambassador. But I will not waste time listing our contributions. Instead, I will make this simple announcement. Effective immediately, humanity withdraws from the Galactic Council." The chamber erupted in noise. Some delegates laughed, thinking this was another human tantrum that would pass in a few weeks. Others seemed confused, as if they couldn't believe the humans would actually leave. "Furthermore," Sullivan continued when the noise died down, "all human colonies and outposts will be abandoned within the next 7 days. We will remove all traces of our presence from Council space. You will have exactly what you always wanted, a galaxy without humans in it." She turned and walked toward the exit, followed by the rest of the human delegation. As they reached the door, Sullivan looked back one last time. "We came in peace 30 years ago," she said. "We leave in peace today. I hope someday you will understand what you have chosen to lose." The doors closed behind the humans with a soft whisper. The chamber remained silent for several long moments before the arguments began. On Earth, Jake Morrison watched the broadcast of Sullivan's speech on a large screen. Around him, his staff worked frantically to coordinate the final stages of the evacuation. In less than a week, every human settlement in Council space would be empty. "Think they'll try to stop us? By the time they realize we mean it, we'll be long gone." Dr. Carter looked up from her tablet. "The Deep Space Scouts have confirmed our destination. The Andromeda Cluster has over 300 habitable worlds and no signs of intelligent life. We'll have room to grow without anyone telling us we don't belong." Jake smiled for the first time in months. "Then let's go home," he said. "Our real home, the one we're going to build ourselves." Above Earth's atmosphere, the last commercial ships were docking with the Generation fleet. Soon, the blue marble that had been humanity's cradle would be empty and silent, waiting for visitors who might never understand what they had lost. The exodus had begun, and it would be completed without a sound. 3 months had passed since the human delegation walked out of the council chambers. At first, nobody really cared. The Vortani celebrated by throwing a feast that lasted for 3 days. The crystalline Jaren sang harmony songs about the return of proper order to the galaxy. Even the usually cautious Catherians seemed relieved that the disruptive humans were finally gone. But now, something was wrong. Council investigator Velanak of the Jaren race floated in his environmental suit above what used to be the human colony of New Seattle. The mining settlement had been built into an asteroid that was rich in rare metals. It should have been buzzing with activity, filled with human workers and their families. Instead, it was completely empty. "There are no signs of violence," reported his assistant, a young Nefari named Bloodle. The aquatic being's translation device made her voice sound like bubbles popping. No blast marks, no damaged buildings, no bodies. They just left. Velenok's crystal body hummed with confusion. His species thought in patterns and logic. This situation made no sense at all. What about their equipment, their mining robots? The ore they had already extracted? Gone, Bloodle replied, checking her scanner. Everything of value has been removed. Even the air recycling systems have been taken apart and carried away. It's like they planned this very carefully. This was the 15th human settlement they had investigated in the past 2 weeks. Every single one told the same story. Empty buildings, missing technology, no trace of where the humans had gone. It was starting to worry the council leadership. On the Vertani homeworld, Ambassador Zexthul was meeting with his military advisors. The scaled alien paced back and forth in his office, his yellow eyes bright with anger. 3 months ago he had been the hero of the council for getting rid of the human problem. Now he was being blamed for economic troubles across several star systems. Explain to me again why our trade routes are failing, Zexthul demanded, turning to face his chief. Economic advisor. The smaller Vertani, named Kexul, shifted nervously. The humans controlled several key shipping lanes between our territory and the Outer Rim colonies. They also maintained the refueling stations at 3 important jump points. Without their presence, our merchant ships have to take much longer routes. Some goods are now taking twice as long to reach their destinations. So build new refueling stations, Zexthul snapped. We are the Vertani Empire. We don't need humans to run our trade networks. It's not that simple, sir, Kexul replied. Carefully. The humans chose those locations because of gravitational patterns and stellar radiation. They understood the physics better than we realized. Our engineers are trying to reproduce their work, but it could take years to figure out. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, the Nefari Confederation was facing an even more serious problem. Their food production systems were breaking down. For the past 20 years, they had relied on human-designed agricultural technology to feed their growing population. Now, with the humans gone, nobody knew how to maintain the complex systems. Dr. Yelenev, the Confederation's chief scientist, floated in her tank of nutrient-rich water, studying readouts from dozens of failing farms. The bioluminescent patterns on her jellyfish-like body flickered with stress. The crop yields are down 30% and falling, she reported to the Confederation Council. The humans gave us these systems, but they never fully explained how they worked. We thought it was simple technology, but now we realize there were hidden complexities we never understood. The news was getting worse every day. Across Council, space, systems that had worked perfectly for decades were starting to fail. Nobody had noticed how much the humans had been doing behind the scenes, quietly keeping things running and solving problems before they became crises. Premier Yithler of the Council called an emergency meeting. The ancient being was one of the oldest members of the Galactic Alliance, having served for over 200 years. His species, the Ethereals, were beings of pure energy who rarely involved themselves in physical matters. But even he was beginning to understand that the situation was serious. We need to find the humans, he announced to the assembled delegates. If they won't return willingly, we may need to consider other options. What other options? Asked the hegemony representative, a mechanical being whose robotic voice showed no emotion. We don't even know where they went. Our best scouts have found no trace of their ships anywhere in Council space. That was when investigator Velenok made his report about Earth. The homeworld of humanity had been the last place anyone thought to check. After all, why would they abandon their colonies, but stay on their original planet? But when Velenok's team finally arrived in the solar system, they found something that shocked them all. Earth was empty. Not destroyed, not damaged, not conquered by enemies, just empty. The cities were still there, perfectly preserved. The roads were clean, the buildings were maintained, even the parks looked freshly tended. But there were no humans anywhere. "It's impossible," Velanok reported to the council. "A planet doesn't just lose its entire population overnight. Where are the bodies? Where are the signs of disease or disaster? How does a species of 8 billion individuals simply vanish?" His team had spent 2 weeks searching the planet. They found museums with carefully preserved artifacts of human history. They found libraries with books arranged in perfect order. They found homes with beds made and dishes washed, as if the owners had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. But they also found something else. In major cities around the world, the humans had left messages. Not electronic messages that could be easily erased, but words carved into stone and metal that would last for thousands of years. "We came in peace. We leave in peace. Do not follow us." The same message in dozens of human languages and several Galactic Standard scripts appeared in New York, London, Tokyo, Delhi, and 100 other cities. It was clear, simple, and somehow deeply unsettling. In the ruins of the United Nations building, Velanok found the longest message. It was carved into the marble floor of the main assembly hall in letters 3 feet tall. "To whoever finds this record, humanity lived on this world for 300,000 years. We learned to make tools, to build cities, to reach for the stars. We dreamed of joining a community of intelligent species and working together for the good of all. That dream died when we realized that some bridges cannot be built across gaps of prejudice and fear. We go now to find a place where our children can grow up free. We leave this world clean and whole for whoever comes after. US, learn from our mistakes. Be better than we were. Be better than you are." The message was signed with a simple statement: "The last generation of Earth." Back in Council space, the economic situation continued to worsen. The proud Zelthran Confederation had been forced to ask for emergency food shipments when their mining colonies started running out of supplies. The Vortani Empire was facing riots on 3 different worlds as goods became scarce and expensive. Most disturbing of all, the various species were starting to blame each other for the crisis. Old rivalries and suspicions were surfacing as each group tried to secure resources for their own people. The unity that had held the council together for centuries was beginning to crack. In his private chambers, Premier Yithler reviewed reports from across the galaxy. For the first time in his long life, he was beginning to understand that the council had made a terrible mistake. The humans hadn't been a problem to be solved. They had been the solution to problems nobody even knew existed. But now they were gone, vanished into the vastness of space without leaving so much as a hyperspace trail to follow. And for the first time in galactic history, the council was truly alone. The great silence had begun, and nobody knew how to break it. 6 months after the human exodus began, Admiral Ben Foster would have smiled if he could see what was happening back in Council space. But Ben was busy with more important things. He stood on the bridge of the generation ship, New Horizon, watching the stars stream past through the massive viewport. They were traveling faster than any human ship had ever gone before, pushed by engines that used technology the Council had tried to keep secret from them. "Navigation report," Ben called out to his crew. Lieutenant Amy Richardson, a young woman with red hair and bright green eyes, looked up from her station. "We're maintaining course for the Andromeda cluster, sir. Current speed is holding steady at 0.98 light speed. No signs of pursuit. Communications?" "Radio silence maintained across the entire fleet," reported Chief Communications Officer Steve Martinez. 215 ships, all running dark. If anyone's looking for us, they won't find us until we want to be found." Ben nodded with satisfaction. The human fleet was spread across several light years of space, but they maintained their formation through carefully timed quantum communication bursts that lasted only milliseconds. To any outside observer, they would appear to be empty space. Between the galaxies. Back in Council territory, the situation was getting worse every day. On the Vortani homeworld, Emperor Zexkar called his son Zexthul into the throne room. The massive chamber was carved from black stone and decorated with the skulls of conquered enemies. It was meant to show the power and glory of the Vortani Empire, but today it felt more like a tomb. "Explain to me," the Emperor said in a voice like grinding metal, "how the removal of one primitive species has brought our empire to the edge of economic collapse." Zexthul kept his yellow eyes fixed on the floor. 3 months ago, he had been the hero who rid the galaxy of the human problem. Now he was the fool who had destroyed the very systems that kept their civilization running. "Father, we did not understand how integrated the humans had become in our operations," he admitted. "They were involved in trade, manufacturing, agriculture, and transportation in ways we never realized." "Be specific," the Emperor demanded. Zexthul pulled out a datapad and began reading. "Our mining operations in the Kepler sector have shut down because the humans designed and maintained the atmospheric processors. Without them, the air in the mines is poisonous. Our agricultural worlds in the outer rim are experiencing food shortages because human biotechnology kept the soil fertile. 3 of our major shipping routes have been abandoned because the navigation computers used human-designed algorithms that we cannot reproduce." The Emperor's scales turned a deeper shade of black, which meant he was becoming dangerously angry. "And you tell me this now?" "We thought their technology was simple," Zexthul said desperately. "They never acted like it was advanced or difficult to understand. They just made everything work quietly, without drawing attention to themselves." On the other side of the galaxy, the Nefari Confederation was facing an even worse crisis. Their homeworld of Aquatica was experiencing the first famine in over 1,000 years. The jellyfish-like beings floated in their great underwater cities, watching their food supplies dwindle day by day. Dr. Yulanef had been working around the clock, trying to understand the human agricultural systems, but every solution she tried only made things worse. The plants would grow for a few days, then wither and die. The carefully balanced ecosystem that had fed billions of Nefari was falling apart. "The humans didn't just give us farming technology," she reported to the Confederation Council. "They gave us a complete biological system. Every plant, every microorganism, every chemical process was designed to work together. When we try to replace one component, the entire system fails." The Confederation's military commander, Admiral Kulseth, pulsed with frustrated colors. "Can we force them to return? Do we have the ships to hunt them down? With what?" Dr. Yulanef replied bitterly, "Half our fleet is grounded because the humans designed our fuel refinement process. The other half is needed to transport food from other worlds. Even if we could find them, we don't have the resources to fight them." But it was on the industrial world of Mechanica that the truth finally became clear. The planet was home to the hegemony of Krath, a species of mechanical beings who had always prided themselves on their technological superiority. They had built their civilization around the idea that organic life was weak and inefficient. Chief Engineer Unit 447 was analyzing the failures cascading through their manufacturing systems when he made a discovery that shocked him to his circuits. The humans hadn't just provided them with technology. They had provided them with improvements to their own technology that made it work better. "Impossible," Unit 447 stated to his superior. "Administrative Unit 001, organic beings cannot improve mechanical systems. It is against the fundamental laws of efficiency." "Examine the evidence," Unit 001 replied, his optical sensors glowing red with stress. Unit 447 pulled up holographic displays showing factory production over the past 5 years. Human-suggested modifications increased our output by 37% while reducing energy consumption by 22%. Their designs eliminated bottlenecks we did not even know existed. Continue analysis. More disturbing, their modifications were so elegant that we incorporated them into our basic systems without realizing their origin. When we tried to remove human influence from our factories, we discovered that the humans had become part of our technological foundation. For the first time in his existence, Unit 001 experienced something his programmers had not included in his emotional matrix. He felt stupid. Meanwhile, in the deep archives of the Council's Central Library, a young Catherian researcher named Pextry was making discoveries that would shake the foundation of galactic politics. The Catherian were an ancient race of scholars who valued knowledge above all else. They rarely involved themselves in political matters, preferring to study and learn. But Pextry was curious about the human situation. Something about their sudden departure didn't make sense to his logical mind. So he began researching everything the Council had on file about humanity's 30 years of membership. What he found was shocking. The official records showed constant complaints about human demands and human aggression. But when Pextry dug deeper into the classified files, he found a different story. The humans had quietly prevented 3 separate wars through creative diplomacy. They had solved resource conflicts on a dozen worlds through innovative solutions. They had even prevented a plague that could have killed billions by sharing their medical knowledge freely. This cannot be correct, Pextry muttered to himself as he reviewed the data. If this is true, then the humans were not the problem. They were the solution. He looked deeper into the financial records. The humans had never asked for special trade privileges or exclusive rights to resources. In fact, they had often shared their discoveries and innovations without asking for payment. Several species had grown wealthy using human ideas and inventions. The immigration records were equally revealing. Humans had requested permission to settle in star systems that other species considered worthless. Empty systems with no valuable resources, dangerous systems with unstable stars, systems so far from civilization that no one else wanted them. They had never tried to take territory that belonged to someone else. Pextry's research painted a picture of a species that had been genuinely interested in cooperation and mutual benefit. They had contributed far more to galactic civilization than they had taken from it. And when they were rejected and insulted, they had simply left quietly rather than fight back. As the evidence mounted, Pextry realized that the Galactic Council had made the worst mistake in its history. They had driven away the best allies they had ever had, and they had done it because of pride and prejudice. The researchers' discovery would soon reach the highest levels of Council leadership, but by then, it would be too late. The human fleet was already beyond detection, carrying with them not just their people and their technology, but the hope for a better future that the galaxy had foolishly thrown away. In the void between galaxies, Admiral Ben Foster looked at the stars ahead and smiled. They were going home to a place they had never seen, but they were going there free. 1 year after the human exodus, Dr. Helen Price stood on the observation deck of the generation ship Liberty's Dawn and watched something that took her breath away. Through the transparent aluminum window, she could see their destination growing larger every day. The Andromeda Galaxy Cluster stretched across the darkness of space like a spiral of diamonds, beautiful and welcoming. "It's magnificent," she whispered to Captain Tony Walsh, who stood beside her. Tony was a quiet man with gray hair and kind eyes who had served in the Earth Defense Force for 20 years before volunteering to lead one of the generation ships. "Hard to believe we're almost there," Tony replied. 2 more months and we'll be in orbit around our new home." Helen nodded, but her mind was already working on the challenges ahead. She was the chief scientist for the colonization project, and she knew that building a new civilization from scratch would be the hardest thing humans had ever attempted. But she also knew they could do it. They had proven their strength by walking away from a fight they couldn't win. "Any word from the scout ships?" she asked. Tony smiled. "Captain Dan Rogers sent a message yesterday. He's found 12 worlds that could support human life without any terraforming. Rich soil, clean water, breathable atmosphere. It's like the galaxy was waiting for us." Back in Council space, the situation had gone from bad to catastrophic. The great chamber where the Council met was half empty now. 3 entire species had withdrawn from the Alliance to focus on their own survival. The remaining delegates sat in small groups, no longer the unified body that had once ruled 1,000. Star Systems. Premier Yithler floated at the center of the chamber, his energy form flickering with exhaustion. In his 200 years of service, he had never seen the Council so close to complete collapse. Trade between the member worlds had dropped to almost nothing. Several worlds were experiencing civil unrest as their populations demanded answers about the failing systems. "We need to discuss the Cytherian report," he announced to the remaining delegates. The report that Pextree had prepared was now public knowledge, and it had shaken the foundations of galactic politics. The young researcher had documented 30 years of human contributions to Council civilization, and the evidence was overwhelming. Far from being the aggressive, demanding species they had been portrayed as, humans had been model citizens who had given far more than they had received. Ambassador Zexthal, who had once been the loudest voice against humanity, now sat in silence. His political career was over, and he knew it. The Vartani Empire had lost half its territory as worlds declared independence rather than starve under his leadership. "The evidence is clear," spoke Elder Colder of the Nefari. The ancient being's voice was weak, and his normally bright colors had faded to dull grays. "We were wrong about the humans. Completely, utterly wrong." "Wrong about what specifically?" asked Unit 001 of the Krath hegemony. The mechanical being's voice showed no emotion, but his optical sensors dimmed with what might have been shame. Elder Colder activated a holographic display that showed the human requests over their 30 years of membership. They never asked for special privileges. They never demanded territory that belonged to other species. They asked for 3 things: equal voting rights, permission to settle in empty star systems, and the right to trade freely with all Council members. The display changed to show human settlements. Look at where they wanted to build their colonies. The Kepler Nebula, which we considered worthless because of radiation storms. The Void Sector, which was too far from any trade routes to be valuable. The Burning Worlds, which orbit unstable stars that no one else wanted to go near. "They were not trying to take our territory," Elder Colder continued. "They were trying to make homes in places we didn't even want." The holographic display shifted, again showing economic data. "In return for these modest requests, they gave us technology that improved our lives immeasurably. Agricultural systems that ended famines. Transportation networks that connected distant worlds. Medical advances that extended the lifespans of every species in the Council." Unit 1's optical sensors brightened as he processed this information. Query: if human contributions were so valuable, why did we vote to restrict their activities? The chamber fell silent. Nobody wanted to admit the truth, but everyone knew it. They had been afraid. Afraid of a young dynamic species that seemed to solve problems effortlessly. Afraid of losing their position as the dominant powers in the galaxy. Afraid of change. "We let our fear and pride blind us to the truth," Premier Yithler said finally. "We treated our greatest allies as enemies. And now we are paying the price for our prejudice." On the generation ship Endeavour, Captain Dan Rogers was reviewing the latest reports from his scout teams. The ship's command center buzzed with activity as his crew prepared for humanity's arrival in their new home. Dan was a former military officer who had volunteered for the dangerous job of exploring unknown space ahead of the main fleet. "Status report," he called out to his navigation officer. We've completed surveys of 47 star systems, reported Lieutenant Corinne Foster, a young woman who had graduated from the academy just before the exodus began. 15 have planets suitable for immediate colonization. Another 22 could support human life with minimal terraforming. Dan nodded with satisfaction. The galaxy cluster they were approaching was everything they had hoped for and more. It was filled with young, stable stars and planets that were perfect for human settlement. Best of all, there were no signs of intelligent life anywhere in the region. What about resources? He asked. Abundant, replied Chief Engineer Paul Davis. We've located mining opportunities for every mineral and metal on the periodic table. Some of these worlds have resource concentrations that would make the old Earth mining companies weep with joy. Dan smiled. The humans would not just survive. In their new home, they would thrive. Back on the Council worlds, the political situation continued to deteriorate. The Vortani Empire had split into 3 separate factions, each blaming the others for the crisis. The Nefari Confederation was accepting refugees from failing worlds, but their own resources were stretched to the breaking point. Even the ancient ethereals, who had seemed above such concerns, were beginning to show signs of stress. In his private chambers, Pextry continued his research into the human exodus. He had become obsessed with understanding exactly how the Council had made such a terrible mistake. The more he learned, the more amazed he became at the scope of human contributions to galactic civilization. They were everywhere, he muttered to himself as he reviewed the data. In every major project, in every important decision, in every crisis that we faced. They were the glue that held our civilization together, and we never even noticed. He had discovered that humans had been involved in ending the trade war between the Vortani and Zelthran 15 years ago. They had suggested the compromise that allowed both species to save face while avoiding a conflict that could have killed millions. But the human role in those negotiations had been kept secret at the time, and few people remembered their contribution. Humans had also been instrumental in developing the universal translation technology that allowed all Council species to communicate with each other. The breakthrough had come from a human linguist named Dr. Rebecca Thompson, who had figured out how to make the devices work with non-vocal species like the Krath. Most importantly, humans had been the ones to suggest the Council's policy of peaceful expansion. Before their arrival, the galaxy had been dominated by conquest and territorial wars. The human concept of cooperation and mutual benefit had transformed galactic politics. We didn't just lose a member species, Pextry realized with growing horror. We lost our conscience. We lost the voice that reminded us to be better than we were. As he prepared his final report, Pextry knew that his findings would change everything. The Council would finally understand what they had thrown away. But he also knew that understanding would come too late. The humans were gone, and they were never coming back. In the void between galaxies, Dr. Helen Price continued to watch their new home grow larger. She thought about the world they had left behind and the world they were about to build. There would be challenges ahead, but she was confident that humanity would meet them. They had learned something valuable from their time in Council space. Sometimes the greatest victory is knowing when to walk away. The revelation was complete, but the damage was done. The galaxy would have to learn to survive without the species that had made it better. 2 years after humanity left Council space, Admiral Ryan Cooper stood on the observation deck of the flagship Horizon's Edge and watched the sunrise over New Terra. The planet was beautiful, with blue oceans and green continents that reminded him of Earth. But this world was theirs now, and they had built something here that was uniquely human. The city of New Hope spread out below the orbiting ship like a living thing. Human engineering had learned from the mistakes of Earth. The buildings were designed to work with nature instead of against it. Solar panels and wind generators provided clean energy. Parks and gardens were woven throughout the urban areas. It was everything they had dreamed of when they first reached for the stars. Status report. Ryan called to his bridge crew. Commander Lisa Morgan, his second in command, looked up from her station with a smile. All colonies are reporting successful harvests. Population growth is steady. The industrial centers are exceeding production targets. We're not just surviving here, Admiral. We're thriving. Ryan nodded with satisfaction. The human exodus had brought 200 million people to this new galaxy cluster. They had spread across 50 different worlds, each one becoming a unique expression of human creativity and determination. Some focused on agriculture, others on manufacturing, still others on research and exploration. But all of them were free. Any word from the deep space exploration teams? Ryan asked. Captain Mike Stevens reports that his team has found evidence of ancient ruins in the Perseus Arm, Lisa replied. Whoever built them has been gone for millions of years, but the technology might be compatible with our systems. We're finally starting to unlock the secrets of our new home. Back in what used to be Council space, the situation had reached a point that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. The great alliance that had ruled the galaxy for over 1,000 years was dying. Not from war or conquest, but from its own failures and prejudices. Premier Yifler had resigned 6 months ago, replaced by a council of emergency leaders who were desperately trying to hold the remaining worlds together. But their efforts were failing. Every month, more star systems declared independence or simply stopped communicating with the central government. On the Vortani homeworld, Emperor Zexkar was meeting with what remained of his advisors. The proud empire that had once controlled hundreds of worlds now held fewer than 30. The rest had either joined other factions or declared themselves independent nations. Give me options, the Emperor demanded, his scaled features showing the stress of constant crisis. We could try to find the humans, suggested General Morthek. If we could convince them to return and help us rebuild, with what? Zexkar interrupted bitterly. We have no ships that can travel between galaxies. We have no technology they would want. We have nothing to offer them except the same prejudice and contempt that drove them away in the first place. The truth was painful but undeniable. The humans were gone, and they were never coming back. The galaxy would have to learn to survive without them. On the aquatic world of Nefari Prime, Dr. Yelenev was working on what might be her final research project. The Confederation was slowly starving as their agricultural systems continued to fail. Food riots had broken out on 6 different worlds, and the government was powerless to stop them. We could try to reverse engineer the human biotechnology, she suggested to the Emergency Council. How long would that take? Asked Admiral Kulseth, his bioluminescent patterns dim with exhaustion. 50 years, maybe 100, Yelenev replied. Honestly, the humans didn't just give us farming technology. They gave us a complete ecosystem that took them decades to develop. We're trying to rebuild something we never truly understood. The same scene was playing out across the galaxy. The Krath hegemony was struggling to maintain their factories without human engineering improvements. The Zelthran Confederation was facing transportation crises as their shipping networks collapsed. Even species that had never directly worked with humans were feeling the effects as trade and cooperation broke down. But perhaps the most significant change was happening in the mind of a young Kitherian researcher. Pextry had become the galaxy's leading expert on human civilization, and his work was changing how entire species thought about cooperation and diversity. The humans understood something that we did not, he explained to a gathering of scholars and politicians. They knew that strength comes from working together, not from dominating others. They knew that the best solutions often come from the newest perspectives, not the oldest traditions. His audience listened carefully. Pextry had become something of a celebrity since his research had exposed the truth about humanity's contributions to galactic civilization. Look at how they left, he continued. They could have fought us. They had the technology and the determination to wage war against the entire council. Instead, they chose to walk away and build something better elsewhere. That takes a kind of courage that we never recognized. On New Terra, Captain Sarah Mitchell was leading a team of explorers through the ruins that Mike Stevens had discovered. The ancient structures were clearly the work of an advanced civilization, but they had been abandoned long before humans or any other council species had reached the stars. What do you think happened to them? Asked Dr. Robert Blake, the team's archaeologist. Sarah examined the smooth walls covered with strange symbols. Maybe they made the same mistake the council did. Maybe they drove away the people who could have helped them survive. It was a sobering thought. The ruins showed signs of rapid abandonment, as if an entire civilization had simply packed up and left. The parallels to humanity's own exodus were impossible to ignore. Back in council space, some species were finally beginning to learn from their mistakes. The remaining Kitherian had established new policies welcoming refugees and newcomers. They had created councils where every voice was heard equally, regardless of how long a species had been part of their alliance. The young Nefari government had begun teaching human philosophy in their schools, trying to understand the mindset that had created such innovative solutions to complex problems. They were slowly rebuilding their agricultural systems using principles of cooperation and sustainability that humans had tried to teach them years ago. Even some Vortani were questioning the aggressive traditions that had defined their culture for thousands of years. A small but growing movement was calling for peaceful expansion and diplomatic solutions to territorial disputes. But these changes came too late and affected too few. The Great Galactic Council was finished, broken apart by its own inability to recognize the value of diversity and cooperation. On New Terra, Ryan Cooper walked through the streets of New Hope and marveled at what humanity had accomplished in just 2 years. Children played in parks that had been designed by artists and engineers working together. Scientists from different human colonies shared their discoveries freely. Former soldiers worked alongside former civilians to build something that had never existed before, a truly free society. Any regrets? Asked Lisa Morgan as she joined him on his evening walk. Ryan thought about the question carefully. About leaving? No. About what we might have built together if they had been willing to try. Sometimes. They walked in comfortable silence through the bustling city. Around them, humans were living the dream that had brought them to the stars. In the first place, they were free to explore, to create, to grow, and to become whatever they chose to be. Do you think they'll ever understand what they lost? Lisa asked. Ryan looked up at the stars visible through the city's transparent dome. Somewhere out there, across an impossible gulf of space and time, the species of the old galaxy were struggling to survive in the wreckage of their prejudices. Some of them already do, he said quietly. But understanding and wisdom are two different things. We offered them partnership, and they chose dominance. We offered them cooperation, and they chose competition. Maybe their children will be smarter than they were. As they reached the central plaza, Ryan stopped to read the inscription carved into the monument that stood there. It was the same message that humans had left on Earth, but with one important addition. We came in peace, we left in peace, we learned to be better. Now we are home. The galaxy had taught humanity a hard lesson about the nature of power and prejudice. But humanity had learned something even more valuable in return. They had learned that sometimes the greatest victory is not in conquering your enemies, but in having the courage to walk away and build something better. The Council had finally understood what they had lost, but humanity had discovered something far more precious. They had found themselves.